Meagan Wolfe, thank you very much for making time for us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Well, here we are, just a few days from Election Day. How prepared are you for this presidential election?
So the state of Wisconsin, we are ready as election administrators to administer a very well-run election with accuracy, with integrity. And I know that because our local election officials, the ones who really run elections in Wisconsin, they have been training and preparing for this for the last 4 years. And I feel very confident that they're ready.
And I say presidential election, but there's a lot more on the ballot, obviously, with state races and a U.S. Senate race. What do you think is the biggest change that you have implemented or will look different in 2024 that we did not see in 2020?
So I think in terms of the voter experience, there isn't a lot that has changed. We haven't seen significant changes to the law. We haven't seen significant changes from court decisions. But I think you will see that your local election official is very cognizant of the increased need for transparency. Elections have always been transparent, but it's about the election official creating those opportunities, making sure that people know how they can get engaged with the election process. And so I would fully expect to have those opportunities more at the forefront, right? Encouraging people to go to the public test of voting equipment that happens 10 days before the election in every single community. Things like that, where typically we have not seen a lot of public or voter participation in those mechanical processes. I think our local election officials are really going to be pushing for people to get involved, to come and get their questions answered directly.
I know the state did somewhat of a deep dive after 2020. The Legislative Audit Bureau kind of looked at some things, made some recommendations. Are there some significant changes that maybe voters won't see but will add to that transparency that you talk about?
So certainly the commission took every single recommendation of the Legislative Audit Bureau seriously. They met for many hours in public meetings and went through all 30 recommendations. They produced 2 reports that talk about what they've done. A lot of the recommendations pertain to things like administrative rules. And if you've been a part of that process or heard about that process before, you know that it's a very drawn out process. But the commission has continued to have many, many public meetings where behind the scenes they're working with bipartisan committees of voters, of observers, to try to create administrative rules that look to address the fine points of the law where there are gray areas. And so I think that's some of the important work that's been happening behind the scenes, is that the commission has addressed every single one of those recommendations and has been working very hard to fulfill all of those obligations.
I think there's a famous statement that says, to err is human. But when we get in these types of close elections, there does seem to be no room for error.
That's right.
How confident are you that the process will be safe and accurate?
So I am very confident that at a macro level, that our elections, we're going to see that they're extremely well run, that there's data to support that, right? That the public and everyone has access to really verify the outcome of the election. But will mistakes happen? Of course they will. I think on small scales, there's always going to be small errors that are made. But I absolutely don't expect that any of those types of small errors that might be made would be determinative of the outcome of an election. But elections are run by humans, right? They're run by humans in every single one of our local jurisdictions. So in every city, town, and village, you have a clerk that runs your elections. You have your poll workers that are running your election. There are almost 40,000 poll workers needed to run a November general election. And so that's a lot of your neighbors, a lot of your friends that are volunteering their time to be a part of the process. But sometimes humans make small errors. So I don't expect anything on a larger scale, but there could be smaller things. And I'm sure that our local officials will be very transparent about anything that does happen.
But how do you make sure that when all the votes are cast and the local clerks and the counties do their job, how do you make sure that the state did its job and the numbers are accurate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are multiple checks on the numbers of the election. So every election in Wisconsin with a state or federal level contest gets triple checked as part of a public process. So after election night, the results you see on TV on election night, those are always unofficial. And then the law lays out 3 steps where the results are verified in public. The first step happens in each municipality, where they have to go through all of the artifacts and numbers of the election. They have to be sure that there weren't more ballots that were cast than they have signatures in the poll book or registered voters in their community. If there is, they have to, as part of that public process, figure out what happened, what went wrong here. Then, once they've certified the election at the municipal level, all of the artifacts and materials are sent to the county clerk. They do the same. They have a public canvas where they're going to go through everything that was sent to them from the municipality and make sure that all the numbers make sense. When all 72 counties are done with that, then all of the numbers come to the state. We have a public canvas where, again, we have to go through and make sure that we don't have more votes that were cast than we have registered voters in the community.
Well, you're looking at about 10% of it. Is that the number you use?
So that's an additional check.
Oh,
so that's beyond this. So the 3 levels of canvas happen before an election can be certified. But another thing that happens is after a November election, there's an audit of the voting equipment. And we will randomly select 10% of all the reporting units in the state, and they have to conduct a hand count of their ballots to make sure that the hand count matches the outcome of their electronic voting equipment.
And that's from a state race up to the presidential race.
So there'll be 4 races that are selected as part of that audit, and so yes, they'll examine a variety of contests, including the presidential race.
Does anything give you pause about what the result could mean to voters when they look at how accurate the system is?
So I think that it's really important for voters to have access to the data around an election so that they can do their own verification. But there's also no substitute for firsthand experience. I encourage people to get involved. If you have questions and concerns about how elections are run, you have more opportunities to observe that process here in Wisconsin than in any other state.
As a poll worker or poll observer.
Exactly.
But do you have any concerns that now these voting places will become crowded with people who are maybe not there just to watch, but to intimidate?
So I think that our poll workers and our chief inspectors, who are the people in charge of each polling place, they're well prepared to manage that. They're ready to welcome observers into the polls. They know that observers are an important part of the process, and I truly don't expect that anybody is going to cause problems. And if there is some type of issue, I think that our chief inspectors, our poll workers, our law enforcement are all ready to be able to handle those. But we're going into this expecting a large amount of observers and expecting that we want them there to be a part of the process.
Do you have added in more security layers to make sure they are safe places?
So we really encourage our local election officials to work with their local law enforcement so they have plans in place. We do a lot of work with our local election officials to make sure they have contingency plans so that if they're dealing with some kind of crisis, it could be that there's some type of person that's looking to cause harm. It could be something like weather. We see often unpredictable weather here in Wisconsin. We could have snow. And so what would they do in the cases of those emergencies? Those are plans that not only do they have and put together before Election Day, but they actually practice and exercise to make sure that their plans will work. And so we hope that nothing negative happens on Election Day, but if it does, they have forged very strong relationships with their local law enforcement, and they know how they'll deal with a crisis.
Will it be your office that will monitor misinformation about the election and voting, or is that up to the individual municipalities and clerks?
It's a team effort. So we certainly at the Wisconsin Elections Commission, we maintain a page on our website, elections.wi.gov, called Fact Checks. And if we hear that there's some type of claim about elections that's brewing, if we see a trend in the contacts coming to our office or to our clerk's office, we will put that on our website and we will provide data and an explanation about that. Our hope is that that's useful to our local election officials, because in many of these small towns, the clerk is very part-time. They may not be very comfortable with having those discussions with media, and so we hope that's a resource for them. But some issues are local issues, and we're never going to speak on behalf of our local jurisdictions. We don't want it to become a game of telephone, but we do provide answers to questions as we see them brewing or trending on Election Day.
But are you concerned about the rhetoric you're already hearing on the campaign trail, things like too big to rig, and concerns about how 2020 didn't go the way that some people wanted?
So I think in elections, we've been dealing with misinformation around election processes for at least the last 4 years. And so I think it's important as election officials that when we see something that's trending, that's gaining traction, that may actually sway somebody's behavior, that we put out correct information so they have access to that. But sometimes, these claims are just noise, and I think we have to be really careful not to let the noise around elections distract us from our important work that we have to do.
We live in a cybersecurity world, so how
That's
do you
right.
now check on that part of it, which things that can be happening that we don't see either at a polling place or around the various places where people can vote? How big of a concern is cybersecurity?
So misinformation and disinformation, those are sort of newer things to us as election officials. Cybersecurity has been something that we have been working on building an incredibly strong foundation on for the last decade. And so here in Wisconsin, we have so many local election officials that we've really built into our statewide system a lot of security that makes sure that everybody has a baseline in all of our local communities. So for example, we've provided things like grants to local election offices to make sure they have a secure computer, that they have IT support, and that they can attend cybersecurity training. We've also done things like require cybersecurity training before we'll even give credentials to our local officials to use our statewide database. And so in terms of cybersecurity, that's something that we have such a strong foundation in and have really been able to forge some strong partnerships. And I feel confident that we have our system to a level that we're able to address any threats that are known as of now, and that we'd also know how to respond if something unknown or novel comes our way.
There's always a lot of chatter around elections about who is voting and who shouldn't be allowed to vote. And you often hear about it in terms of people who are not citizens of this country or of this state. How confident are you that non-citizens are not voting in Wisconsin elections?
So there's a couple of ways we know this. One is after each election, the state is required to produce a report of any instances of fraudulent voting. We have those posted on our website. We also send them to the legislature after each election. And if you look back to all the past reports, so the last 15, maybe 20 years of those reports, we see that there have been less than 5 instances of non-citizens that chose to participate and then were prosecuted. And so we know that the data shows that this is a very, very small group that chooses to engage in that behavior. We also have checks in place like the certification required to register to vote. When you get a ballot, you have to be a registered voter, whether that's by absentee or at the polls on Election Day. You first have to register. And at that time, you have to certify you're a citizen. You also have to provide a photo ID to get a ballot. And that photo ID is going to be something that's issued by the state or federal entity that has many verifications on that voter's identity and citizenship status. And so there are both checks before Election Day, there are checks that happen on Election Day and during registration, and then if there is someone that slips through the cracks and wasn't eligible, those are caught and prosecuted, and that information is provided to the public.
Big thing that came up in 2020 was the option of indefinitely confined and people who vote in nursing homes. Do you feel that that there is enough checks and balances in the system that someone cannot game the opportunity with indefinitely confined or people in nursing homes?
Sure. So indefinitely confined voters, just like any other voter, they have to be a lawfully registered voter. Also, somebody can't have their right to vote removed except by a court, right? So somebody can only be deemed to be ineligible, incompetent to be able to vote if a court has made that determination. And so I do feel confident that the legal processes following the statutes that we have in place in the state of Wisconsin, that is being done in all of our communities.
So indefinitely confined, though, not everyone has to show a photo ID?
So Wisconsin state law, this is not a policy, Wisconsin state law says for indefinitely confined voters. So those who are indefinitely confined due to age, illness, infirmity, or disability, that they're able to request an absentee ballot and that they do not provide a photo ID. They have other substitutions like signatures and documents from their care facility that they provide with their absentee ballot.
But I think, did your record show that most people have shown an ID over time?
That's correct. I think we took a look at after 2020 when there were many questions about this and did find that the vast majority of folks that are indefinitely confined have provided a photo ID.
Do you think you've cleaned up or clarified the nursing homes and who can go in there, and are people in nursing homes being allowed to vote in ways that someone cannot gain?
Sure. So in 2020, certainly our 6-member commission met. I don't have a vote on the commission, but our 6-member commission met and made some determinations due to a public health crisis in nursing homes that weren't allowing visitors in. Those conditions are no longer in place, and so certainly the letter of the law in terms of sending special voting deputies. So in each community, if they have a care facility, they're required to send special voting deputies. So these are people that have taken an oath, that have been determined to be sufficient to serve in that role in their community. They go out in bipartisan pairs and they conduct voting as part of a public process.
And that's back in place for 2024?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the one other final area, have you cleaned up or clarified or made it easier on the absentee ballot with the envelope? What has to be there, what must be there, what will be accepted, and what would be rejected?
Yeah, so in 2024, the commission did launch new absentee certificate envelopes. And that was part of a 2-year redesign process where we went out and talked to voters across the state to make sure that they knew how to use the envelope. We also did a full statutory review to make sure that every component in there is reflected accurately from state statutes. And there was some litigation that looked to challenge components of it, but ultimately our certificate was found to be sound and in compliance with Wisconsin state law. And so I think we're seeing that the new certificate envelope is hopefully resulting in fewer errors and that people are completing it fully. But for all absentee voters, they need to remember that they have to sign their absentee certificate envelope and they have to have a witness, and that witness is going to need to provide their address as well. Now, there is a court decision that says if you don't have the full address, things like a zip code, that the election official may be able to determine that based on other information. But you should complete it thoroughly, follow the directions, make sure that all the fields are filled out.
And that if a ballot envelope comes in with missing something or not fully done, do the clerks have the option to go back to the voter, or is that ballot not accepted?
So in some cases, if your certificate envelope is not completed, if there's time, they can actually send it back to the voter for them to complete it. If there's not time, then they're going to have that voter and probably their witness as well come down to the clerk's office or come down to the polls in order to make any of those corrections. And so, really encourage people to get it right, follow the instructions the first time, because if there is a mistake, you're probably at this point going to have to go in person to make a correction.
I just want to end on finally, again, appreciate all your time. As you know, Republicans don't want you in this job. They've made it clear that they were looking for somebody else to do. You have faced, adversity in this job. How are you approaching it, knowing the political environment we're in and how people they don't like the way you're doing your job? How are you approaching it in 2024 to get through this election?
So my focus is fully on administering this November election. But that being said, I know that I do my job with integrity. I know that I've done a good job. And so my job is the nonpartisan chief election official for the state of Wisconsin. And as part of that, I have to stand strong against partisan attempts to sway me, and I'll continue to do that.
I appreciate your time.